Faye Darmawi. I'm the founder and executive director of the SF Urban Film Fest. Thank you for coming tonight to the 9th annual SF Urban Film Fest. The theme this year is Rituals in the City, and this program is called Questioning Rent as a Routine. That's right. Yes, okay, a very provocative title. So we'll be recording tonight, and the recording will be posted on SF Urban Film Fest YouTube channel. So thank you for signing your release forms. The content on the YouTube channel is obviously free. So since tonight's program is on land and property, it's more than fitting to do a land acknowledgement. We are here on the unceded ancestral homeland of the Ramaytush Ohlone, the original inhabitants of the San Francisco Peninsula, or Yelamu. We offer this land acknowledgement as a way to bring visibility to the Ramaytush Ohlone and the American Indian communities who live and thrive on their ancestral homelands. We also suggest that as a small act of reparations, you consider donating to the Segura Tay Land Trust, which is located in the East Bay, and they are a community-based, urban, women-led, indigenous-led organization that is working to repatriate the land for indigenous stewardship.
Yes.
Yeah, they're amazing. I think you've seen them on the pre-show loop. And now this is the first section of the audience engagement part. This is a very, very active workshop today. So right now I'm going to ask you 3 questions, and you have to participate. Okay. Okay. Who here has worked in tenant rights or advocacy or community organizing? Okay. Can you count? Maybe like 10-ish? Okay. Who here is or has worked in affordable housing as either a property manager or as a funder, or has some kind of relationship to the affordable housing world? Okay, so a little bit more, maybe like 20. And the last question is, who here cares about affordability in the Bay Area? Yay! Okay, you're in the right place. All right, so I'm going to introduce the folks here tonight who will be helping me to entertain you, no, to teach you about affordable housing and to get your thoughts and sort of kind of a common ground, also bringing out your creativity, because this is a film festival, right? This isn't like a housing convention or a public hearing, yeah? Okay, so tonight we have Rebecca Foster. Rebecca is the founding CEO of the San Francisco Housing Accelerator Fund, and since 2017, the Housing Accelerator Fund has invested nearly $400 million to preserve and build affordable housing for over 3,000 SF residents. The fund was created to help nonprofits acquire small apartment buildings with financing that can close in 30 days to beat out private speculators. Rebecca will present the Affordable Housing Finance 101 this evening. We also have tonight, so excited, Reetu Mody. Reetu is an attorney, policy consultant, facilitator who has worked in many sectors, including tenants' rights, defending low-income folks facing evictions. She's helped advocate for and pass the Alameda County eviction moratorium. Reetu is also a community organizer and multidisciplinary artist. Reetu will facilitate tonight's interactive discussion. And then we also have Karyin. Karyin, are you in the house? All right. Karyin will introduce the short film, My Little Hilton. It was directed by Kevin Wong, who could not be here tonight. Karyan Tham is an award-winning filmmaker based in San Francisco and Kuala Lumpur, and worked both in narrative and documentary. Her projects have won awards at film festivals nationally and internationally, including Best Short Adrift in Sunset and Best Narrative Feature Collisions. Karyan was a SF Filmhouse she was an SF Filmhouse resident in 2022. Okay, so we are in an affordable housing crisis, and we have been for 30 years. As some of you may not know, but before I started the SF Urban Film Fest, I worked in affordable housing. I was a project manager for an affordable housing nonprofit here in the Bay Area that's built many, many units of affordable housing, but the crisis continues. The four of us here tonight, Rebecca, Reetu, Karyan, and myself, have been tackling affordable housing in many different ways, but we all have a common goal, which is to support folks in creating and maintaining stable and joyous living arrangements and communities. The question has always been how. So tonight we will try to demystify one national strategy with very, very narrow focus. The creation of affordable housing. It's very, very complicated with lots of moving parts and lots of different constituents. We only have an hour and a half, so we're not going to cover all the complications and contradictions. But we are going to start questioning rent as a routine. And as you see around the room, there can be some questions that have been written on Post-its. And later on, you'll have a chance to answer them with filling in the answers on the Post-it. But tonight we will start with the film screening of My Little Hilton. Then Rebecca will go into the presentation, and then Reetu will facilitate the group discussion. And the goal of the discussion is really to have folks talk about their lived experience, their ideas, and their questions. So without further ado, Karyan.
Hi everyone, my name is Karyan, and you'll see My Little Hilton shortly. And I just want to acknowledge that Gail, who so generously shared her story with us with the filmmaking team, she's here. So after the film, if anyone has questions, I'm sure we can talk about that too. But basically, Gail's story is one of many that we've been discovering around folks who are living in SROs. And there's a range of experiences, but really the common theme is how important stable housing is. And we want to make sure that to make it affordable, even in a city like San Francisco. I think we can do it, so yeah.
Thank you. There's a seat in the front. You guys want to come into the front?
The seat's over here and up in the front.
And I think next time my dream was to have Gail perform in this space.
Right.
Yeah. Thank you for coming with us tonight on this journey, Gail. So I'm going to hand this over to Rebecca. We have to be in the
middle.
We have to be in the video. So you tell us where we have to be.
Okay.
Thank you, Faye. Alrighty. I think I probably have to be able to sort of see it. Let's see. And let me make sure I know. Okay. I'm Rebecca Foster, the CEO of the Housing Accelerator Fund. And in addition to being just really happy to be here to be part of the discussion afterwards and getting to watch that amazing film with you all, my role tonight is a little bit of affordable housing finance 101. And so I'm going to give a little bit of background. So the Housing Accelerator Fund, as Faye mentioned, we are about 6 years old, and we were created out of the mayor's office in San Francisco, really kind of coming out of the last recession, when there was a huge demand for speculative investors to buy buildings in neighborhoods that were facing a lot of displacement, and nonprofit local community-based organizations like Meta and the Mission, Chinatown CDC, Tenderloin Neighborhood Community Development Corp. couldn't, if they had to go borrow money from the city of San Francisco, go through the Board of Supervisors, like imagine trying to get a loan and close on a building and competing with that, 10 investors bidding. There was no way that they could compete. So the original reason we were created was to help address some of that gap, and I'll come back to it. We've grown a lot since then and are trying to focus on a lot of different financing gaps in the market. I will also acknowledge that we're part of the system, I would say, and so we try to both, we try to make the system work better, and we try to get out in front of, help the government be a little more nimble and be faster, and we're part of this existing system. And as Faye mentioned in the land dedication, both we have this history of the original displaced people, the Ohlone, the Ramaytush Ohlone. These are the different the tribes that in the Bay Area that were originally here. And then we also, this is a map from 1937 that was the Federal Home Loan Corporation's map showing areas of relative danger for making home loans. So kind of like a redlining type map. And so oftentimes, as we've all experienced, programs that are created by government, which I kind of view as like government is us. We don't always like it, but we got to be part of it because this is a democracy, and we're part of making it better, and we need to hold it accountable and be part of how it changes. Often has created programs in support of affordable housing that perpetuate discrimination and inequities and are quite imperfect. And so that is not the theme of this 101, but it's really important to acknowledge because it is interwoven in affordable housing. So what are we referring to when we talk about affordable housing, permanently affordable housing? So we refer to this document called a deed restriction, a declaration of restrictions. It's basically a document that is recorded on the title of the property that says this is, the property can only be rented to or restricts the occupancy to qualified low or moderate income households. And that document recorded on the title means that, and it can have a number of different levels of AMI and different restrictions within it. AMI stands for area median income. So in most affordable housing in the Bay Area, at the max would go up to restrictions of 120% of area median income. A lot of it tops out at 80% and much lower percentages, but just to try to make that a little more concrete, that's 30% AMI for a family of 4 means that family's income is about $40,000. 80% of area median income is just over $110,000 for a family of 4. So depending on the current market environment, a lot of housing is unaffordable at above that 80 to 100%, and in the hot market, well above 120% of AMI housing can be unaffordable in the Bay Area. And in affordable housing that has this deed restriction on it, generally what the level that the government sets for is that people will not be charged rent above a max of 30% of their monthly income. And that's above that level is kind of in many cases throughout the Bay Area, people are paying well above 30% of their income to cover rent. Rent control is a really important part of protecting tenants and residents, and an important other area of legislative policy focus. It's not what we're referring to here as permanently affordable housing, because there are some places where tenants are at risk in different ways than in permanently affordable housing. It's also when a resident in a rent control building leaves their unit, that unit goes to market rate. And so it doesn't stay affordable for the community and for the city in perpetuity the way that permanently affordable housing does. So the big picture affordable housing programs in San Francisco are the inclusionary housing program, which is there's a requirement that for all new market rate buildings, over a certain size that are built, that they have to make a certain percentage, that's currently around 20%, of those units available for people who are at below market rent. So affordable units either on site or they pay a fee to the city that they can then use to build other affordable housing. 100% affordable housing are buildings that are not oftentimes owned and operated by nonprofits, funded with a variety of public funding sources, and are 100% affordable versus like a slice of the, the 20% slice of the buildings. And then there are also vouchers, which can be, some of them are project-based and some of them are tenant-based. And so that's federal government funding source that's a rent subsidy, basically, that provides a subsidy that if it's tenant-based, that you can take to whatever, market rate housing that you want to rent. And if it's project-based, is connected to the building. The main qualifying factor for affordable housing is income level, and it's depending, and the city runs a lottery program for affordable housing. And depending on what tranche of those income levels are, there's like different levels of waiting lists, which are pretty long in general for kind of all of the different affordable housing that the city runs the lotteries for. There are also additional preferences, not just income level, that can also come into play, which are up here. And the city of San Francisco does have proportionally has built a lot of affordable housing and acquired and transitioned a lot of housing into permanently affordable, and I don't think it's any surprise for anyone here, like the demand far outstrips the supply. So who lives in affordable housing? This is just like an example of kind of the different folks that live in affordable housing in San Francisco. You could have, in a lot of the buildings that we finance, there are seniors that are on a fixed income from Social Security. There's teachers, EMT workers, small business owners, individuals who are working part-time or different jobs and might have challenges because they have a disability of like work, and then so they can only work part-time. Artists, restaurant workers, retired. So I think you can imagine all like the scope, but it's not, I think there can be stigma about like who lives in affordable housing, and it's a lot of people, and a lot of people who are part of all of our lives, hopefully. Okay, so for new construction, if somebody's building a market rate building that's not a dedicated affordable housing building, there's like two big pieces of the funding that they use to pay for that construction: debt and equity. And the loan is basically sized to the expected rents or the expected price if it's a home ownership, but we're mainly talking about rentals here that they would sell those condos at. And we'll get more into that. And then the equity investment is paid back second, but if the project does really well, if the rents go up a lot, like they get more upside on that equity investment, but it takes more risk. And in affordable housing, so generally affordable housing buildings cost about the same to build, like the total development cost, as market rate buildings. There's sometimes it takes longer to pull together all of the different funding sources, and that can cause some delays, but in general, the costs are about the same. But the big pieces that are different is this loan in a market rate project is supported by rents, and rents are lower in affordable housing projects, and so you cannot support as big of a loan, and there's not, except for like in a manufactured way that we will get to, there's not this like big potential upside of return in affordable housing that can pay an equity investor, entice them to come and invest in affordable housing. So instead, the big three pieces are, for new construction projects, are a big chunk of subsidy. which generally comes from the city of San Francisco, and San Francisco are the local government. And that is structured as a loan that gets paid back last and may never get paid back, essentially. And then there's, depending on the income level, a very small slice of a loan, of a permanent loan that actually can pay back a lender, that actually does pay back. And then there's a product that's subsidized by the federal government called low-income housing tax credits. And that is a replacement in some ways for equity, and the way the investors get paid back is by a credit on their taxes. So you have banks and insurance companies and like large corporations with big tax liabilities that will invest, and also that have Community Reinvestment Act responsibilities. They will invest for this equity piece, but their return is that tax credit versus a direct financial return.
Okay.
In terms of paying the loan, which I think this like gets to the specific piece, basically how you go through the construction, and generally for a new construction project, you'll get like an affordable housing developer will get a construction loan. But you only get a construction loan to pay for you to build this building if your construction lender says, I know how you're gonna pay me back. And so this is looking at what that like permanent capital stack is. There's a construction loan that comes in, and how that big construction loan gets paid back is the stack we saw on the slide before. To just zero in on this loan piece, this is the same to buy a building and rehab a building too. So if you have these 4 different units, and this is their annual income level and the rent that they're paying, then you have what the total building income is. So that's like the top line of the revenue. And as a super important sidebar, in all of the policy work and things that I'm sure everyone here cares about, it's like really easy to get into silos about affordable housing versus other stuff. There's a huge piece of this math is also related to like how much people are getting paid for jobs in the Bay Area. And so this like income side of the equation is a really important piece too. And how much of that income they have to spend to cover healthcare. And they have to spend to cover unexpected life events, and all of those different factors. Like that is a huge piece of this as well that is important to hold. So you have the rent that people are paying, and then there's just monthly expenses to actually operate a building separate from paying back your construction loan. So the trash, the utilities, all of the different things that are required to keep a building operating. If it's an older building that's been acquired and rehabbed, those costs are usually higher because things leak more and things break more, and you got to replace all the light bulbs, all of those different things. And this is also not taking into account for permanent supportive housing. There's case management needed as well, and that comes with a whole other layer of cost. So once you take that out, you get what's left over is what you can pay back this loan with. And so you can imagine when you compare to that previous slide, if your bill, if these rents are way higher, then you can pay back a much bigger loan. But that's not the job of affordable housing. So you have to have some other sources to pay back that construction loan, and that gets to these, to the local government subsidy and to tax credit equity. And this shows kind of the numbers are probably hard to see, but from 2013, and this is projected out. I think this is from the housing element in the city of San Francisco, shows projected subsidy sources. So this shows you can see there's a lot of variation in the subsidy sources that the city is able to put into affordable housing, but ranges, in recent years from a couple $100 million a year to several $100 million a year, depending on if it's a time when they've just done a big affordable housing bond or had one-time funding sources. Like in the last few years, there were a lot of one-time funding sources supporting housing related to the stimulus bill and pandemic relief funds. So in general, it costs about $700,000 or more to build new construction, permanently affordable housing. It depends on the unit sizes in San Francisco. And local government subsidies are generally about, of that capital stack, are plus or minus $300,000 a unit. And then the other subsidies come in from the tax credit program or other state or federal sources, but the local government's putting in roughly $300,000 per unit. Buying and rehabbing existing housing, it usually costs less to buy the units, although they oftentimes need a lot of rehab to bring them up to like a health, safety, quality of life level for the residents. And there are fewer state and federal sources to offset the local government's funding, so they put in a larger proportion of the funding generally for preservation. This is a little bit dated, there's not a more recent one yet, but it shows where the places in San Francisco where there's a concentrate, where there are, from 2018, affordable housing that the city's financed. So the last 15 years, the city's built or preserved, funded 13,000 units of permanently affordable housing. The recent housing element that's been in the paper a lot in terms of what the city has to be able to do in order to meet the needs for demand for affordable housing is 46,000 units of affordable housing in the next 8 years. So that's a big number. And if you assumed kind of like the level of subsidy that has been historically required, that's almost $20 billion, that would cost almost $20 billion. So there's a lot that needs to be done to meet, to meet that need. So a little bit just going back to kind of where we started, like one of the roles that the Housing Accelerator Fund plays is we basically just provide the loan that bridges to all of these different sources. And this is, like, if you actually looked at the capital sources, which I know we have some of our affordable housing developer friends in the audience, oftentimes for new construction projects especially, this would have like 11 different pieces of this stacked bar. And it is hard to pull them together. They all have different application timelines. They all have different requirements for like what's included in your building. And so so there needs to be some money in front of that, both on the new construction side and also for preservation. You get back to the like you're competing with other market rate buyers to buy a 5-unit building in the Mission. Like, you can't wait for how long it's going to take to pull these permanent sources together. So we're generally providing that upfront capital to try to help the affordable housing developers move faster, be more flexible, kind of move at the speed of the market, and then we're working closely with the city on ensuring that they have a smooth transition to the permanent funding. And Faye already mentioned this, but we are at almost 2,000 affordable homes, 3,000 plus residents, and this is the map of our portfolio of projects. The vast majority of them are acquisition rehab projects, and then we have a few big new construction projects in there.
Any home ownership?
We don't yet have any home ownership. I mean, so that's hard. So this just kind of goes, we have some here that just go back to the earlier slides in terms of the theme for this is questioning rent as a routine. And so I think kind of where we talked about as a group ending is, we obviously need funding structures that can pay for building affordable housing, because we need a ton more of it, and also can provide the funding to be able to bring buildings that are at risk, both invest in them to upgrade them and make them seismically safe and improve them for the residents. And the current system, as it is, like the way that the funding source that supports that is some version of rent. And that rent can be coming from individual residents, from employment income. It can be coming from Social Security income for seniors. It can also be coming from a rent subsidy, from a voucher. So there's a number of different there, which are in relatively short supply, unfortunately, in San Francisco. But that's the funding that then helps fund the construction and the acquisition. And so when we talk about rent as a routine, I think like that's one thing that we can be thinking about, like, well, how else can we make sure that this happens and that we have, structures to pay for the dramatic levels of production of affordable housing we need that aren't rent, or that are better than rent, or that tweak the way that we currently focus on the role that rent plays. And I think another key piece, which is just like, is super important, we're really feeling it right now, particularly with our partners, Chinatown CDC, with a number of SROs in Chinatown, the greater Chinatown area, is sometimes it's not even just like, we're not even talking about like, is rent high, can rent be high enough to cover a loan? It's actually what people can afford to pay if they're on fixed Social Security income, or given the economic environment and the job availability, is not enough to cover the operating expenses. And that's, we don't have, we have the city of San Francisco has an operating subsidy program for supportive housing for people who are exiting homelessness, but there's a pilot program, but there's not a substantial program that actually funds this operating gap. And that's part of what like a more comprehensive rent subsidy, rent voucher type program funded by the federal government could fund something like that. But there's something like that doesn't really exist, so it's another key piece of the puzzle. Yeah?
I'm just wondering if that kind of squeeze on these buildings currently with operating expenses comes from rising costs, or more of a reduction in revenue from rents?
That's a super great point. It seems like it's both. I kind of see Whitney in the background. He's looking the other way. I didn't notice it before. So, at what we're hearing from building owners, insurance costs are going through the roof, and the insurance industry is going through a huge repricing because of climate change, and our affordable housing developers are suffering the brunt of that among many others, and so those costs are going up a lot. I think it's also being able to keep property. I mean, it's the lack of affordable housing in the Bay Area hits affordable housing owners in multiple ways, because managing a building is staff intensive. And kind of an operation that's it's locally based, and you need property management and asset management, and those, so you also need to be able to have affordable homes that aren't within a huge commute for your team, and to keep people in those jobs. So I think it's both.
So why doesn't San Francisco use the Section 8 home buyers program? Why don't we have that program here?
That is a great question. I don't know if anybody else in the audience knows. The question was about the Section 8 home buyer program.
Well, there isn't, sorry, I'm not sure about the Section 8 home buyer, but the city has a separate DMR program.
Yeah.
Where you can go and buy.
There is a down payment. So the city does.
No, I know about the down payment.
Yeah.
But other cities like Vallejo, other cities around the Bay Area have Section 8 home buyers program. We don't take part in that.
There's a reason that doesn't work in San Francisco. San Francisco housing prices are so high that the amount of subsidies available from it still doesn't cover the costs. So they've tried it a number of times, but it's been very difficult to make work.
But to take a step back though, it does raise the question of rent as routine, right? Why rent at all? Why aren't we starting home ownership? I mean, the other alternative is complete state ownership. I mean, we had public housing before, so there's public housing, 100% state ownership. There's what we have sort of like in the middle, which is like this public-private sort of super complex financing scheme that Rebecca beautifully put together. Then we have home ownership over here. So that's like the big concepts in terms of the financing. But we want to keep the ball rolling and thank Rebecca. Reetu, did you want to say a few words here to get us going?
Sure.
Yes. Thank you.
My mask was caught in my earring. Sorry, y'all. Hi, everyone. I'm Reetu. I'm a former tenants' rights attorney and worked with a lot of folks who faced eviction in addition to being an artist. And so the discussion is going to be focused on all of you, which means that I actually have a somewhat minimal role other than getting you to talk. But I want to bring up a few concepts before we get into our activities. I'm going to make you be a bit interactive. Like Rebecca said, we function in some version of a democracy. And a really key component of that is getting to know people around you, and we're going to practice that. Faye brought up a few ways of thinking about property. I'm going to suggest we can dream bigger and also more ancient, depending on the cultural backgrounds you come from, right? So we can question whether land should be property. We can look at community land trusts, which have similar loan responsibilities in our current system, but get most of their loans from philanthropic grantees or grantors, right? So when we start our discussion, feel free, if you're a person who's like, I want to work with reality, I'm super pragmatic, do it. So important, really a part of just transitions. If you're someone who's like, why don't we just get rid of all national borders? Why do we have to be connected to land? Do it. Because we have to start from where we're at and get somewhere better. So with that, the first thing I'm going to ask folks to do, and we're going to try and turn on the lights a little bit and also dim them a little bit, is turn around and make like a group of 6. And before you do that, the question you all are going to be considering first, we're only going to be doing this for about 5 minutes, is what did my little Hilton make you think about what housing means for you and what it means for people who live in San Francisco, right? So introduce yourself, answer that question, go with where you're at. We're going to take 5 minutes, turn around, get to know your neighbors, and we'll come back together. If you have a thought you want to share or something that came up in your discussion that was valuable, let me know. Here we go.
So one thing is, we keep looking at the same countries, the small little countries, and we never look at Asia. Like, I mean, they're able to house like high density housing, great transportation, and like a Singapore where they have, you know, high density housing with home ownership. So like, it's like looking at a better example.
And what was your name?
Carla.
Thank you, Carla. And I will say a lot of folks bring up Japan and Tokyo, and while a lot of things aren't replicable, checking out zoning laws can be very helpful. Other thoughts that came up that folks might want to share from their groups? Anything touching that came up? Anything about the film folks want to share? Over here. And if you could say your name as well.
Hi, my name name is Sarah. I think I was most struck in the film by just Gail's just sharing her life and her housing and the lack of filmmakers not trying to justify or point out deserving housing. And it just felt like I was just witnessing somebody being and moving through life. And that had me really reflecting on like what home or housing is to me, right? It's just a place to just be, and being really exhausted by us always constantly having to like justify why we need affordable housing. And I felt like this really just centered being in a really beautiful way. Thank you.
Oh, there's a comment back there. And a point we'll just keep building on is really questioning this idea of deservedness, which is a huge part of the culture in the US overall.
Yes, hi, I'm Richard. I work here in San Francisco in the housing industry. But I did want to say, I wanted to appreciate the director for just capturing our city so beautifully. I feel like, yes, I would love to see more of San Francisco, our streets on film. And then I think Gail's story captured that spirit of San Francisco as a beacon for artists, which is something that we have celebrated and we have enjoyed for generations, but we have begun to lose. And so she kind of recaptured that spirit for us. So thank you, Gail.
One other comment before I move you into a different part of an activity. Does anybody have a comment they'd like to share?
Sure.
Oh,
No,
we can. We'll do both. Go ahead.
Hi, my name is Joshua Simon, and I actually work for CAST, which created this building as an affordable space. But I wanted to really appreciate that Gail brought out that art is the importance of art to life, and that it was a source of happiness, and being that it's not something extra, that it's part of sort of the core of being, and that it's part of having a good life, and part of what we all want, and, that we each have something like that. So I very much appreciate the way that was brought out and how having a place to stay enables that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Full disclosure, I sometimes work with these filmmakers, so I clearly am like what they do. But I really like how the hotel that Gail lives in was just. She was just very happy about it, and we hear so much about how horrible housing and affordable housing is, and what it feels like SRO is affordable, and it just was like, there's none of that in this. It was just, she's like, this is great. So, good job.
Thank you all. I want to highlight a few things that got brought up in the discussion. So there's a question of what are other options out there? Where are the places we're not looking, right? What can we learn from others? Why do we have theories around who deserves housing? When did that become a thing? What does it do for us? How is San Francisco deeply and intimately connected to art? And housing actually depicts that both visually and in the culture of this city. And finally, there are a lot of negative experiences with SROs, so single room occupancies with affordable housing, but also it can be a lifeline for many people and a space where dreams are built. What does it look like to build that for everyone? So I'm gonna ask folks, this is a bit interactive, we're gonna take 10 minutes, you're gonna see post-it boards outside. Feel free to write thoughts around the questions. And the reason we're doing it this way is because people think and brainstorm in multiple ways. And our hope is that the film touches you and you learn from it, but also that you have agency. We're not just spectators, we all live this, right? So we're gonna take 10 minutes. That does mean we're gonna run about 15 minutes over. We started about 15 minutes late. If you need to go, we understand, but we're gonna come back as a group and answer 2 questions together. The first is, what are the other systems that don't rely on rent for people to have housing? And what does it look like to do that in San Francisco? So feel free to brainstorm, talk to other folks, write on the post-it boards. We're gonna come back together in 10 minutes, and then we're gonna answer those 2 questions when we come back together, all right? All right, so we're gonna come back together at 7:26. Go for it.
Maybe it's like on the word contribute, like this is like a stop something, but I'm thinking like how can we frame that into them taking an active role and still contributing?
I know often when you go to a film premiere or you go to an adult learning, there's not a lot of moving, there's not a lot of talking, so thank you for wandering and exploring these ideas, right? We're gonna end, what we wanna end with is an opportunity for folks to share big ideas and small ideas, but ultimately where you as an individual, you feel like you can play a role in shifting things, creating more affordable housing, maybe creating better incomes, maybe just making your own place a little bit happier for yourself, and that helping the community. So we're gonna start with the first question I mentioned, and this could be informed by any of the questions that were outside, but what are other ways of providing housing without using rent? What else could we base housing on? How else could people receive housing?
As part of their employment.
As part of employment. Okay, what else? That's one idea. What's another idea? Home ownership. Okay, so everyone, there is no rent. You own your property. So we have employment. As part of your employment, home ownership. What are some other ways people could have housing that are not dependent on rent? Barter?
Yeah.
Do you want to explain what you mean?
Real sharing.
Oh, just, that different people bring different resources to the equation. So potentially you could barter for a room with your skills. That's right.
Thank you. So we could barter for rooms. We could also change our money systems, right? Where a loan could be, I don't know how we would quantify a skill that makes someone happy, such as singing, but perhaps that is a barter trade because it builds something different. What else? Back here.
Just totally fidgeting, spitballing right now. What if every child in the public school system was guaranteed a house? And then you like put families together, and then bam, everybody's got a house. I mean, okay, we get to teach that as people have kids, pay for fees,
This doesn't take away rent, but if, when you pay rent, you're getting ownership. You're putting in shares and investing, whatever it is.
Thank you. So 2 ideas here, right? Which is if you're paying anything, it builds into your own equity. And the other idea is what if we use our other beneficiary systems that we have decided as a republic are invaluable, such as public education, to determine from babyhood that you have a place to live and so does everyone related to you and your caretakers. Okay, so those are a few ideas. What are a few more? I feel like there's more. Should I just pass the mic around? I might. Okay, back here.
Yeah, my feeling on it is it's an issue of safety, basic health and safety. Having a house gives you shelter. And I think of it as basically a human right. If you don't deserve it, it's a basic human right to have safety. And everybody should have the safety of a home.
So I think in the idea that housing is a human right, one of the questions that gets brought up is who is controlling housing, land mass, private property, and how do we both diversify and democratize that control to ensure that it can actually be a human right? accessible. Okay, thank you. Other thoughts? What else can we do other than renting? Everyone cool with renting here?
Okay, I got a really crazy idea, but it could theoretically work. So, housing doesn't have to belong to private corporations. It can belong to government. But how does government take housing from private corporations? We bankrupt them. We tax the shit out of them for having vacancies, for making profits, to the point where they can't pay their taxes and now they're in default. So now it goes into the possession of government. And once it's in possession of government, is in ownership of the people. I'm never gonna get elected by private real estate developers if they ever heard this. But that's just one crazy idea.
So that's an idea that might get you elected in this room. So part of that idea is looking at the takings clause, right, in our Constitution, both in our federal and state Constitution, which is like government can't just come in and be like, that's mine. So they did that a lot. Technically not supposed to do that. So what's another way to get at that? We can bankrupt, right, corporations, and actually they did that for themselves quite a few times. So perhaps that is a way.
But not the woman of this time.
What other ideas are there? Let's get a few more in here. Back there.
Could you pass it back?
I live in the Berkeley Student Co-op and we house 1,400 students across 19 houses and 3 apartments. We pay money every semester. It's about $4,000 that cover our room and board, but it's not like traditional rent. It's money that goes towards the long-term maintenance of our homes, paying our staff who helps coordinate and do member education resources, money that goes towards the bulk ordering of food and resources. It's extremely affordable for students, and I think cooperative housing is something we should look into more.
That's true.
Thank you. So one way of questioning rent is also focusing on the style of housing. So we have cooperative housing, and there are also cooperative businesses, and that money creates jobs, but also in its own way pays into style of equity. Okay, 2 more ideas. There are definitely 2 more in this room. Someone who hasn't said anything to the group, but probably said something to someone else that was real smart, but they're keeping on the DL. No other ways of not paying rent? You've never laid in bed and been like, I don't want to pay rent, I wish I could just...
Eliminate property taxes? I mean.
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah.
do you want it? Say it.
Eliminate property taxes that go to waste and fraud, and then change the capital stack.
Okay, so one thought is eliminating property taxes. There's a number of things attached to that, right? Some of that might be funding education, some of it might not be. Some of the property tax that we pay, that corporations pay, goes to nothing because they don't really pay it. There's capital gains pieces, but there are ways to eliminate it. There's a tax code reform that could happen that actually has opportunities for investment into individuals, right? And into communities. One more idea. And then I have another question. What's a way to provide housing to people and not pay rent? At the beginning we mentioned curated land trust, which is looking at the rematriation of land through community land trusts, right? So that's another option. How do we build community land trusts? What does it look like to take care of the land? There have been folks and many people of color who have started looking at what does it look like to build off the grid or homestead, which doesn't rely on public utilities but relies on community cooperation and the use of solar energy to provide housing. So there are options out there. All right, here's our next question. What are y'all gonna do in San Francisco? What do you want to do? I'm actually gonna pass the mic around, so it's gonna be what do you wanna do, what are you doing, or what would you like to see? You pick which one. Mike's gonna go around and you're gonna answer whatever you feel for that. So, what do you wanna do in San Francisco? Or, what are you already doing in San Francisco? Or, what's your crazy idea for what San Francisco should do? Let's start with you, and then just pass the mic.
So one of the things I'm doing is asking where is all this COVID money that is still around, and how we can get more rental assistance. Because folks gotta stay housed. It's not the idea of building more housing without having folks stay housed. So where's this COVID money? How can we get more of it into the hands of small businesses and renters?
Nice.
I think for me, one area that is particularly interesting to me that I'd like to put more time in is on fighting landlord discrimination. There are a lot of people who are identified for voucher programs and all sorts of subsidies who then aren't able to even use them because we have a class of people who set barriers so high and find any way not to house people. So putting more attention there.
Great. And what I want to see more of is more bubbles on the left side of that, yellow bubbles on the left side of that map that we saw earlier, and getting more affordable housing and all sorts of housing built in the west and central parts of the city there. The east side is built so much, and there's neighborhoods that can do their part and help out with this crisis in the city.
Thank you. Well, first, thank you for the program, and thank you, Faye. So what I would like to see is a San Francisco where people of all backgrounds can have the American dream of owning a home and being able to raise a family and feel safe and have the experience that many people elsewhere get to have. What I'm doing with that now is really focusing on the actual pandemic recovery in District 6 in downtown here, hopefully working with leaders with the Economic Institutes in the mayor's office here on the UN SDG fellowship that I have to localize the Sustainable Development Goals for an hypo-pandemic recovery, specifically around small businesses and BIPOC renters in preparation for the Asia Economic Summit.
I'd love to get rid of this idea of having to deserve housing, or that it's based on individual actions, and that housing, everyone should be housed. We all deserve housing. And to that end, since I am filmmaking, so one of the projects that we're doing coming up, it's going to premiere in April, is a feature-length film with stories of people living in SROs across San Francisco, so a diverse group of folks. And you'll see similar approach to how we told the story in the short today that you saw, but also a much broader look at the system. So please come to that. It's called Home is a Hotel.
Two things. One is I organizing installations, and I work in a group. And what I'd like to see is we do have enough economic resources.
That's right.
The problem is the economic system, capitalism. And here in San Francisco, we have 40,000 units that are vacant.
That's
well,
right.
maybe 60,000. I don't even know the number anymore. And I think that what we really need to do is those 90 oligarchs who are billionaires in this town, they need to be taxed, and their money needs to be taken away with them. Nobody needs $1 billion. So I guess what I'm advocating for is an economic and social revolution where people have, everybody has housing, education, healthcare, and we really have to struggle to do that and use as many creative ways as possible. And I won't go on any further, but I have other ideas. That's all.
That was great, I agree. I agree with a lot of what's been said. I think a big piece of it is just making the types of housing that are affordable and that can be developed legal by upzoning a lot of the city and removing barriers to affordable housing development. And I think also a big piece of it is changing the way that power in municipal government is so unequally distributed to wealthy homeowners whose interests are so much better and more often represented by people in power in city governments.
I think Steve also named my big dream, so I'm gonna go with a smaller one, which is I think building consensus around the idea that folks on fixed income shouldn't pay rent.
Similar to some of the things that were being said, I'd really like to see equitable and just densification in a lot of parts of the city, especially like the west side, like Sunset District and Richmond and things like that.
Up here, Ashley, could we finish up here and then we'll go back again?
I would like to see more attempts by governments and organizations to pursue social housing, and I'd also like to eliminate the stigma against public housing, particularly when it's well-funded and led by communities.
So I work in supportive housing now, and I'd really like to see some more vouchers and less rapid rehousing and more stable long-term options.
Well, I'm a small donor to Mercy Housing, which helps a little bit, but I'm really big on changing zoning and allowing there to be a lot more housing built in current places where it's really not allowed.
Thank you.
My last idea is called blue lining. So it's the inverse of redlining, where you create an opportunity zone where we rid half of the regulations that really jack up the price of building housing, and we start to experiment on how we can really build new housing in a much faster and efficient way.
I'd like to see reparations.
Yes.
So I work and pretty much live most of my time in Japantown, and that mall is all reparations. And our families were all sent off to camps and were not able to return. And so there's generational wealth that was lost, and the government has no accountability, So I would like to see today folks really, and Japan is not the only place in San Francisco that this has happened, right? So I would like to see reparations and hold the government accountable. I'd also like to see, it'll be interesting to see what happens with downtown, and if, a lot of those vacant spaces could be used differently, and we really creatively think about how those buildings will not sit empty. I don't think we'll ever fill those buildings again. So it'd be really interesting to see somebody creative come in and do something with that. And then in Hawaii,
let's stick to one idea.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
So many ideas. This is what we want. Thank you.
You can email them to me. I would collect them all.
I'm going to try and take a different approach. First of all, as I have watched over the years, the city provides subsidies for affordable housing. The problem just continues. We just continue to spin around this issue. And more people need the housing. More and more money needs to be provided for the housing. And the tax base just can't support that over time. We can live within, we know what the system is, but we have to make a change or work within that system, I think, in order to sort of provide more benefits. And one way to do that would be generate more taxes from people who are, and I know this is, people who are higher income, upper middle class or upper middle class people would do better with those subsidies, because if they got a down payment assistance program, they could purchase the house and they would still have more income to spend for taxes. And those tax dollars could then be used for subsidized housing, healthcare, and other things. Right now, by subsidizing the lower income people, they don't end up contributing that much into the tax base.
Thank you.
I just want to let folks know we're still running over time, so
we'll keep checking in. I think there are ideas being brought up that we can question, that we may agree with, disagree with, and the point is to have like space to hear where are people at in this room, right? Who can we connect with? So thank you. Back here, are there ideas back here?
I would love to see an end to investment properties, essentially. I think we have enough houses. If people could own those houses, that'd be great. Maybe the interim step is if someone's buying something as an investment, we tax it 100%, and then that extra tax goes to people who are going to just try and buy the one home.
I think I want to have more conversation with my peers and change their sentiments around the deservedness. I have peers who are like very progressive, also peers who like question it, just like having more one-on-one conversations about this topic.
My mind is really going to the movement of Moms for Housing past couple years in the East Bay, and thinking about the number of vacant homes, and so what is the actual root cause of unaffordable housing? Yeah, it's a learning.
I'll just quickly say something here. People were talking about who deserves housing, and I think that contextualizing it as a human right is the way to do that. You know, it is a human right. You deserve housing. You deserve safety. We invest a lot of money in police for safety. Let's invest in the safety for the person who can have a house, a basic human right. And in terms of, there was talk about violent protests, but I think nonviolent protests, getting into the streets and saying this is a basic human right, you deserve the safety of a home, would be another approach.
This way?
Here.
Oh, is there someone here? Sir.
I was trying to get some order or something to this, but I guess we can.
It's all chaos.
Well, we can do chaos too. I don't have a silver bullet, and I don't think there is a silver bullet. And I think that there's something very useful about getting this type of input from people with different ideas. So I don't think there's enough of that going on, and it needs to take place at the level of the city administration, which also brings in the issue of leadership. I think we need the type of leadership that sees that there has to be revolutionary change for this issue. I live in a big, white, tall building that there are tents down at the bottom of it on the street. And they don't need to be there. There are the resources intellectually, creatively, financially to transform the system. But it needs to be transformed. I can't tell you how to do that. I can only tell you that it needs to be transformed, and we have the resources to do that. And so what I want to see is an attempt, at least from the leadership and from every part of the community, to grasp this thing and to transform it based on what we have the ability to do. I don't think we're anywhere near doing that.
Thank you. If there are especially folks who haven't had a chance to speak in the group, could we have them go first? Thank you.
To everybody's points, there have been so many great ideas. I'd like to see more small, brave experiments. So creating conditions for some of these ideas to be tested, and so that we can scale what actually works and makes a difference for people.
Thank you.
Using education to break down fear, especially around rezoning the west side.
Well, don't get me started, but
One idea.
one idea. I think I would encourage people to look at the ideas listed by All Home, which is an organization dealing with homelessness, and the minimum payments, so people get living wage payments below a certain income so they can afford the housing.
Thank you. Were there any?
I'm a nonprofit developer, and so I'm naturally used to living inside the box of what we're supposed to do with housing and rent and all those things. But my sort of bigger idea maybe is more things like appropriation of unused spaces and homesteading kind of, especially group kind of things like the Sears building, art co-op in the Mission.
I don't have an idea to share, but I just wanted to say thank you all for coming. I think for those of us who have worked in the nonprofit housing and affordable housing community for years, we don't always get to hear this sort of wealth of ideas and from folks who aren't in our little bubble or in our box, and it's been really fun and inspiring, so thank you all.
As a smaller thing that San Francisco could do more immediately, we should have rent control for all units regardless of the year the building was built.
Thank you.
And vacancy.
Oh shit. Okay. A couple of us are here from the Department of Homelessness and Supportive Housing in the city, and I feel like when we talk about a lot of these solutions, we talk about solutions often that are extremely inaccessible to unhoused folks and unsheltered folks in the city, and solutions that take a lot of money or are geared towards like equity building efforts for low-income renters, which obviously is awesome and impactful, and I'm into that, but is still often super inaccessible. And this is why our affordable housing and homelessness worlds are so deeply siloed in ways that are so broken and violent. And so I just want to see these solutions become accessible to unhoused folks and unsheltered folks, and there are so many dope ideas I don't have time to right now, but yeah, I just don't want us to focus only on those solutions that are accessible to folks who can pay rent or who are living in affordable housing at all.
Yeah, I'm an affordable housing developer, so I guess I would love to see, us actually getting close to reaching our housing goals, those numbers that were on the screen, in some way, shape, or form. Breaking the systems that we exist within. How do we streamline everything? How do we get rid of all of the different players that are involved in all of the projects? How do we, just make it simpler to build something simple to enjoy? That's a home.
I think I'm most excited about supporting shared ownership programs and pairing that with tenant opportunity, community opportunity purchase, legislation and building on the beautiful relationships that people already have with their neighbors.
And I think these will be our last two folks, unless there's somebody who has not spoken in the group yet.
Small thing, immediately remove any barriers to entry from anyone with criminal records or systems experience from housing, and the financing elements of the tax incentives as well.
This has been alluded to a couple times, but I think creating those incentives that allows the conversion of all the deeply underutilized commercial stock into housing.
Thank you.
All right, so first, can I get a round of applause for everyone in this room? Everyone contributed. Two other things. So, you heard a range of ideas from the folks in this room. There are a few that got brought up over and over again. So one is this concept of tax reform, right? And to get that, who is in leadership? How are they supported? What can they actually do? There is looking at bureaucratic systems and where can we remove barriers so they're less bureaucratic, and where can we make barriers so those, like corporations that may be benefiting, don't benefit. Reparations were brought up several times in various forms, thinking about who is on this land, originally what has happened to them, who got pushed off, why, how do we make things fair and just? How can we creatively do that? Community land trusts, cooperative housing, shared housing, building equity through multiple forms. And also, what about folks who are unhoused? Which in San Francisco, if you live here, if you come here, you see it. And we have a responsibility to our whole community. So when we think of solutions, are they for folks to get from one level of housing to a better level? Or are they actually inclusive of everyone? There are a lot of other ideas as well, but these are threads that kept coming up because they are true for our city. They're true for this place. So I'm gonna encourage you all, since you heard everyone, to go meet the person who you're like, I wanted to say that, but you said before I did, or you said better than I did, or how are you already doing that? Because this doesn't work unless folks meet each other, right? That was the whole point. Other than me not needing to talk the whole time, that's the whole point, get to know each other. The other thing I'm gonna ask you to do before I turn it over to Faye, and you have all done mindful activities probably, so this mindfulness activity will be not that new, but close your eyes and think about the place you would feel the most safe in right now. We're gonna take 30 seconds. We're gonna bring it back in. I wonder what it might look like for us to be able to consistently create that space both for ourselves and those around us. So thank you, and I'm going to return it back to Faye.
Oh my God, thank you so much to Reetu